I'm Kiora Delane, and the last thing my mother ever said to me before I walked out of this family was, "You were never meant to carry our name." She said it quietly, almost gently, like she wasn't destroying something inside me. But she was, because that was the night I realized I wasn't her daughter, just a mistake she spent years trying to erase. And now, standing in the back of a crowded memorial where my own blood pretends I don't exist, I'm about to learn just how far they went to make sure I stayed invisible. They think I came here to mourn. They have no idea what's coming. I stepped back into Savannah after 4 years away, the kind of 4 years that changed the shape of a person from the inside out. Yet the moment I reached the white wood chapel where Aunt Lydia's memorial was being held, nothing felt changed at all. The ceiling fans spun with that same slow, stubborn rhythm I remembered, stirring the scent of lilies into the warm air. It should have felt comforting, familiar. Instead, it pressed against me like a reminder of everything I once tried to outgrow. The pews up front were already packed, bodies leaning together in hushed conversations that stopped the second I walked in. Lily turned just long enough to glance over her shoulder, then flicked her hand toward the back rows without bothering to make room. I nodded, because that was easier than asking for a place that clearly wasn't meant for me. I moved down the aisle, the polished floor reflecting my steps like I didn't quite belong to the space I was walking through. No one reached for me. No one pulled me in or whispered they were glad I came. A few cousins stared like they were still trying to decide whether I'd shown up out of obligation or guilt. I slipped into the last row, surrounded by people who didn't recognize my face or my name, and let the silence settle around me. From where I sat, the family gathered up. Front looked more like strangers connected by ceremony than kin bound by blood. And for the first time since I crossed the city limits, the question rose so clearly I couldn't ignore it anymore. Had I ever truly belonged here, or was I only now seeing the truth that had been waiting all along? When the service ended, the crowd drifted into the adjoining room, their voices low and softened by practiced grief. I stayed near the back, letting everyone else claim their seats while I remained standing by the doorway. The lawyer opened a thick folder and began reading names with the same flat cadence used for insurance forms and property disputes. One by one, cousins, in-laws, distant relatives, each given something, each acknowledged. My name never came. It landed like a small sharp blow to the ribs, not because I expected a share, but because its absence carried a message the room didn't need to say out loud. I didn't belong. I wasn't counted. I wasn't one of them in any way that mattered. Miles sauntered over as the meeting broke into murmurs, his hand tucked casually in his pocket, as if the world had tilted in his favor. He pulled out a sheet of paper, holding it between two fingers like a prop. He claimed I'd signed away my portion, that I must have forgotten. I took the page, and the moment my eyes caught the signature, my stomach tightened. It looked like mine until it didn't. The loop I always added in my last name was missing, a tiny flaw, but enough to burn through the numbness settling in my chest. Someone had forged my name. I handed the paper back and stepped away before the disappointment in my face could turn into anything louder. Later, when the sky dimmed and people cleared out, I sat alone on the chapel's front steps. The wood was cool beneath me, grounding in a way the day had not been. A man approached, his walk slow and deliberate. I recognized him from old photos, one of Aunt Lydia's lifelong friends from the Coast Guard. He sat beside me without asking, his breath steady, eyes kind. He told me Lydia always said I was the brightest in the family, that she feared the others would edge me out if anything ever happened to her. Hearing it hurt more than it helped. It meant she had seen this coming long before I ever returned. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't oversight. It was intention. And for the first time since stepping foot in Savannah, I understood the door. The next morning, I returned to the chapel to retrieve the jacket I'd left behind. The hall was quiet, still carrying the faint scent of wilted flowers and yesterday's sorrow. As I stepped toward the front, I saw movement near the podium. Miles, hunched over a floral arrangement like a mechanic fixing a loose engine part, a tiny green light blinked from inside the lilies. I froze, slipping behind a wooden column just as he adjusted the angle of a small device nestled among the pedals. A camera, small enough to miss if you weren't looking, obvious enough once you knew where to focus. My pulse thrummed, but I stayed silent, watching the precision in his hands. Then I heard her, my mother's voice cutting through the hush. She stood partly concealed behind the organ, speaking in a low, controlled tone. If I acted out, if I raised my voice or questioned anything, she wanted proof, evidence to paint me as unstable in front of extended family, evidence to strip me from the next reading of the will. Miles chuckled under his breath. Confident, almost triumphant. He said it wouldn't take much to provoke me. That one well-timed jab would be enough to catch exactly what they needed on film. Their certainty in my breaking was almost insulting. They weren't just excluding me, they were building a case against me. I stayed hidden, letting their words fall over me like cold water. Every instinct I'd sharpened over a decade told me to remain still. Let the moment play out. Gather information. Reacting now would hand them everything they were hoping to capture. So I slipped out quietly. Steps measured, mind already moving ahead. If they wanted a spectacle, they'd have to look elsewhere. I wasn't giving them the satisfaction of an easy target. And as the doors shut behind me, the plan I needed began to take shape, not fueled by anger, but by clarity. If they wanted to use my silence against me, they would soon learn silence could cut sharper than any outburst they tried to provoke. I spent the rest of the evening back at the small riverside hotel, the room dim except for the glow of my encrypted laptop. The weight in my chest was no longer confusion. It was a sharp, steady pressure that told me I needed proof, real proof, not guesses held together by anger. With one deep breath, I accessed the secure Navy channel I'd avoided for months and entered the Sable 9 escalation code. Once it's sent, there was no closing the lid and walking away from whatever came next. The line buzzed. Devin Ward appeared on the feed, straight to the point. Like always, I told him what mattered. Someone had tampered with paperwork tied to me, and I needed confirmation. He dove into the system logs, fingers moving fast until something stopped him cold. A request had been made 3 weeks earlier to access my records. Not foreign, not random, Savannah local. That alone was enough to make my stomach twist. But he kept going. The access time lined up exactly with the week my family began planning the memorial. Then came the real hit part of my personal file had been downloaded, specifically a section containing my official signature from Navy documents. It didn't take any imagination to connect that with the forgery Miles waved at me. Devin pulled up the final trace, and the second I saw the screen, the room felt like it tilted. The IP wasn't from an unknown device or a neighbor or even Miles. It came from my mother's home network. I leaned back, gripping the edge of the desk to keep myself anchored. I wanted to believe there was some mistake, a misread, a confused signal, but Navy systems don't misread. They don't guess. They follow the trail exactly where it leads, and that trail led straight to the one person I had never prepared myself to suspect. Not him, her. In that moment, the betrayal didn't feel explosive. It felt cold, slow. A realization that the line between family and foe had been shifting under my feet long before I even stepped off the plane back to Savannah. By morning, I walked into my mother's house with a clarity that surprised even me. The cream-colored siding looked the same as it always had, soft and welcoming to anyone who didn't know better. She opened the door slowly, eyes narrowing just slightly, like she was bracing for a storm she hoped wouldn't come. She asked if I was there to stir up trouble. I didn't answer. I asked why my military records had been accessed from her home. For a fraction of a second, something broke across her face, guilt, fear. I couldn't tell. Then she covered it with a practiced calm, insisting I was imagining things. But the silver laptop sitting on the dining table said otherwise. The same model flagged in the logs, the same purchase date Devin mentioned the night before. I pressed her on the forged signature. She turned away, clutching her wrist the way she always did when cornered. She said she thought she was protecting me, that she couldn't stand the idea of me disappearing again. Protection, she called it. But protection doesn't require breaking into someone's life to control it. Miles stepped in like he'd been waiting for his cue, sipping coffee as if this was all a normal family discussion. He told me I shouldn't talk to her that way, that she was fixing my mistakes. His arrogance cracked something inside him, and he slipped, saying all they needed tonight was one wrong move from me, one moment they could record, one burst of emotion they could twist. He froze the second the words left his mouth. Too late. Everything, my erased inheritance, the forged paperwork, the sudden cameras clicked together with brutal clarity. Tonight wasn't about honoring Lydia. It was about finishing a narrative they'd already written for me. I walked out of that house quieter than I had ever been. Not defeated, sharpened. If they were waiting for me to crumble in front of a room full of relatives, they were about to witness the opposite. I walked away from my mother's house with the kind of steadiness that comes only when the ground beneath you has already fallen apart. The river wind hit my face hard enough to sting, reminding me that if I let emotion take over now, I'd walk straight into the trap they'd built. So I kept moving, step after step, until I was back inside my hotel room with the door locked behind me. I opened my encrypted laptop, heart steady, fingers colder than they should have been. I executed the Sable 9 escalation, the highest level verification I had access to, one that forced Navy systems to pull complete access logs, identify device fingerprints, and launch a formal review. Once sent, it couldn't be undone. Devin called within minutes. His voice carried none of the disbelief I'd expected, just focus. He dove into the records. The screen reflected in his glasses as he tracked down the breach I already felt in my bones. Then came the first hit. Not one device had accessed my file, but 3, all through my family's Wi-Fi network. The second shock landed harder. One device belonged to Miles. Devin traced it further. Miles had downloaded the digital sample of my Navy signature, and the keystroke ID matched perfectly. The forgery I saw yesterday wasn't sloppy or improvised. It was built from a stolen fragment of my identity. Then Devin pulled up a full timeline. 2 weeks ago, my mother downloaded my personal file. 1 week ago, Miles edited my signature with military-grade software. 5 days ago, the forged document appeared in their internal system. And yesterday, the hidden cameras were activated, ready to catch whatever reaction they needed from me. It was a sequence, precise and intentional. Not panic, not confusion, a plan. When Devin spoke again, his voice dropped lower. If the forged document had circulated outside family hands, it could have flagged me for abandoning duty, a charge that could destroy a service record instantly. That was when the truth settled in fully. They weren't simply cutting me out of a will. They were trying to erase the part of my life they never controlled. Then the twist arrived. Sable 9 had been approved. 2 Navy liaison officers were already heading into Savannah. They would find me at the memorial. The truth was coming, and my family had no idea what the key'd set in motion. Riverfront Hall glowed with warm light, but beneath it ran a current of tension sharp enough to taste. The moment I stepped inside, conversations paused, eyes trailing after me with thinly veiled suspicion. Miles approached with that polished sympathy he wore like cologne, advising me to behave. I let his words pass without landing anywhere inside me. I'd already spotted the cameras, one hidden in the lilies, another beneath the candles, a third tucked into a lamp fixture, each angled to capture my every breath. Miles kept glancing toward them, waiting for me to slip. If I flinched, they'd twist it. If I stood firm, they'd provoke harder. Then Aunt Sharon moved close, whispering that my mother had said I was struggling emotionally. There it was, the narrative they'd been nurturing, the rumor they needed to justify whatever they planned to do next. If I reacted even slightly, they'd claim proof. My phone buzzed. Devin, "The officers are in Savannah, heading your way." No one else in that room knew what was coming. Across the hall, my mother leaned into Miles, whispering sharply, "Osasai." Her eyes flicked toward me with an urgency she couldn't mask. They wanted me to speak, to break, to give their cameras a headline. Miles climbed onto the stage for his speech, draping himself in sadness he didn't feel, but halfway through, he pivoted. He hinted about family members lacking stability, about those who didn't show up when it mattered. The room turned toward me like it had been rehearsed. I folded my hands, letting silence steady me. I didn't blink. Miles faltered. He needed a reaction and had nothing. And then the doors opened. Two Navy liaison officers strode inside, their uniforms cutting the air like a blade. The room snapped into stillness. One officer lifted a folder and spoke with command that reverberated across the hall. Senior Chief Delane Mariner Echo. We're reporting as ordered. Miles dropped the microphone. My mother's face drained of color. Every whisper died. And for the first time, the entire Delane family saw me without the story they'd invented, saw me as the woman they could no longer erase. The moment the two Navy officers stepped into the hall, the air collapsed into a heavy, breathless silence. Their footsteps struck the wooden floor in sharp, disciplined rhythm, slicing straight through the staged grief and whispered judgment. I hadn't even risen from my seat when the senior officer lifted his voice steady, unmistakable. Carrying the weight of authority no one in that room could outrun, Senior Chief Kiora Delane, callsign Mariner Echo, Navy Cyber Warfare Division. We are here in response to Sable 9. You could almost feel the collective heartbeat pause. My mother lurched to her feet, color draining from her face, but her attempt to object died instantly when the officer told her she had no standing in a federal verification. Miles staggered back, eyes darting to the hidden cameras that now meant nothing. The officer broke the seal on the folder and read aloud the evidence unauthorized access logs, device locations, digital signature manipulation, timestamps lining up with precision. Each fact landed with the clean finality of a gavel strike. My mother gripped the back of a chair. Miles looked ready to fold into the floor. When the officer turned to me and asked if I wished to confirm, I simply rose and placed my classified ID on the long wooden table. Light caught the edge of it, casting a sharp reflection across the room. No shouting, no vindication, just truth. Standing upright, and for the first time in their lives, they saw me not as the outsider they tried to bury, but as exactly who I had become. When the Navy officers stepped back, the attorney reached for the stack of documents they left behind. The room seemed to lean toward him as he opened it. Page by page, reading each line with a firmness that cut through every last defense my family had tried to build. He recited the original signature tied to my file, the forged one created from stolen military records, the access logs pointing directly to the devices registered to my mother and to Miles. Every detail landed with a heavy finality. A stunned murmur swept through the hall. My mother shifted from outrage to trembling remorse in an instant, claiming she acted out of fear that I would never return. Her voice shook, but it didn't soften anything inside me. Fear doesn't excuse sabotage. Miles panicked next, tossing blame in every direction but his own, insisting he was only following orders. They turned on each other so quickly, the whole spectacle felt almost surreal. I didn't say a word. The truth was speaking loudly enough. Then the attorney lifted a small cream-colored envelope sealed with Lydia's wax. He placed it before me with a gentleness no one else in that room had shown. Her handwriting wavered, but her message didn't. She saw me, believed in me, and knew the family would try to eclipse what I had become. She told me to stand anyway. I folded the letter, holding its warmth close. I didn't need revenge. I had the truth in her. After the hall emptied into restless whispers, I stepped outside and let the night wind wash over me. The Savannah River moved in its slow, heavy rhythm, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth familiar, but no longer comforting. The city looked the same as when I'd left years ago, yet it felt like a place built from other people's memories, not mine. Most of what tied me here had already slipped through my fingers long before tonight. My phone buzzed. Devon's voice came steady on the line, asking if I was all right, offering to drive me back to Jacksonville. I glanced over my shoulder at the hall's tall windows. Through the glass, I could see my mother gripping the back of a chair as if it might anchor her, while Miles argued with two relatives who no longer seemed convinced by him. The chaos inside didn't touch me anymore. I'd spent a lifetime trying to earn something that was never mine to claim. Tonight made it painfully, beautifully clear the people who stand with you by choice carry more weight than the ones who share your blood. I turned away from the building, letting the cold ring of the church bell mark the hour. I lifted the phone back to my ear and spoke softly. "Come get me. I'm done here." And I walked forward, no bitterness, no anger, just a quiet, certain freedom.